Hey there. Thanks for joining me. Peter Pan, what a glorious allegory. Peter Pan knows what it's all about. This is why Peter Pan chases his shadow. He chases his shadow because he recognizes that his shadow is a part of himself. This is perhaps why Pan doesn't age. He's forever young. He's immortal. He exists outside of the boundaries of time and space, of birth and death. When Pan finally brings his shadow close to him, his first reaction is to take a bar of soap and try to reattach it through scrubbing what's called the sole of his foot. This is speaking of the cleansing of the soul that innately occurs through the transmutation of the dark into the light. It's speaking of merging with the side of you which has been labeled as dark or scary or distrustful or destructive. And through that integration, you cleanse what seemed to be at odds with the light. Of course, because once we make the darkness conscious, it's no longer dark. It's no longer in the shadows. This is why Peter is forever young. This is why his home is in Neverland. It's another way of saying Hyperborea, Shambhala. And Neverland is depicted as being accessed past a rainbow bridge. This is just like the Bifrost Bridge in Norse mythology, which sends us from Midgard, the realm of the humans, or the realm of limitation, into Asgard, which is the realm of the gods. Godly because of an integration and thus alchemical marriage that has occurred. There's a monster under the bed, but the monster hides under the bed for a good reason. Because it's not truly a monster. If it was truly a monster, it wouldn't be hiding under a bed. You know, we have imagery of scary demons in the closet. Why all this hiding? Because it is the distancing of the shadow that creates a life within that shadow that seems separate from you. To say in another way, if you run from your shadow's going to chase after you. But Mr. Peter Pan recognizes that when you yourself perform that chasing, you become the cause of creation and not simply the effect of a part of yourself that is hungry for attention. But the only reason it would feel as if a part of yourself wants to knock you down is because when we repress energy, it's going to manifest in some way or another to get the point across. The divine, or rather you, is going to do anything it may so you can realize integration. If we wish to break free, then we must stare deep into our own void. We must stare deep into what we call the pits of hell, so that fire can stare back at us, but it ain't gonna burn you. It's gonna burn what you don't require away, as if it never was separate from you. Peter Pan recognizes his shadow is nothing to avoid. So be like the Pan, be like the Piper, and of course, he's that green color, just like the color of the heart space. Tinkerbell represents Sophia, or the divine feminine presence, which is pure magic, and thus allows Peter, or the masculine, to let divine order emerge. Now, most who watch Peter Pan would probably suggest Tinkerbell is more of a toxic feminine figure. But look at it from this perspective. When Peter chooses to ignore this guiding force, this guiding magic, in favor of a replacement personified by Wendy, Tinkerbell gets jealous. Tinkerbell doesn't know how to handle things. And most would interpret this as bad or wrong. That's not a divine quality, jealousy. But this is no different than the story of Adam, Lilith, and Eve, in which the masculine decides to ignore the fertile ground, right? The fairy magic, which is right by one side, in favor of something that seems so motherly, so nice, so warm and generous, but deep down is contained. And this is why Wendy, at many moments in the movie, expresses true rage, seemingly from nowhere. Right? Like the genie comes out of the bottle. Whereas Tinkerbell has no masks as to how nice or nurturing she is. She's nurturing, all right. But if she feels as if she's been taken advantage of, then all of a sudden, the fertile ground of chaos transforms into the pits of despair. At one point, Peter banishes Tinkerbell for her jealousy. But what's interesting is the day is saved when Tinkerbell comes back. At the end, there's a battle between Peter Pan and his Lost Boys and Captain Hook and his pirates. But it looks like they're about to lose until the Divine Feminine comes back. And instead of feeling jealous, actually nurtures that very masculine energy that she's intertwined with. Tinkerbell is uncontained, and she is not afraid to go after what she desires. And what does she desire? She desires Pan. What does Pan do? Well, Pan doesn't cage Tinkerbell. Their relationship is so beautiful because Pan is out there exploring his own strength, his own mutability, right? All around him, he has manifested, pirates to deal with and Indians to play with. He has his troop of lost boys. And because he is expressing himself in full through his divine masculine gifts, Tinkerbell is in love. And this is such a beautiful display of the divine interplay between the masculine and feminine, where the masculine holds the space for the feminine, holding space not being an act of being on your knees, holding space meaning your presence itself, one's masculine presence, opens up doors of inspiration in the feminine. And thus, Peter Pan has a sidekick who is able to bring magic at all moments. This is kind of like Lilith. This is kind of like the story of Sophia, Adam, and Lilith. There's a version of the biblical story of human creation that most aren't aware of, and it's the story of Adam, Lilith, and Eve, and it does tie into Peter Pan, Wendy, and Tinkerbell. And this isn't simply a story of three beings. We're talking about an allegory about the disappearance of the true divine qualities of the masculine and feminine, and the introduction of their toxic counterparts. And it goes like this. Adam wanted to rule over Lilith, wanted her to lie underneath him. So Lilith, refusing to contain herself, fled, and what manifested in front of Adam instead was the very counterpart he asked for, which was Eve. And Eve ultimately led both of them into the pits of duality, eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Because duality inverted everything, the masculine spirit now had a new quest to display its feminine integration through re-remembering the nurturing, creative, even chaotic depth which the feminine offers. And likewise, the original feminine spirit, which is Sophia-Lilith, became destined to display its masculine integration through re-remembering the ordered, strong, and vigorous nature of the masculine. In psychology, this is called the Anima and Animus. It's said that each man and woman carries an inner opposite energy that has been waiting to be unlocked. And this unlocking, we can absolutely say, is the purpose of what we've been going through in this matrix, in this dream time.
Let's look at the Anima and Animus. Just as males and females are outwardly different, yet complementary, there are dormant inverse energies within. Anima, in the unconscious of the male, is the inner feminine personality. Animus, in the unconscious of the female, is the inner masculine personality. So the Anima and Animus are the opposite gendered parts of ourselves, which can be realized and fully developed to erect the true self. To put in another way, there is in the unconscious of each man an inherent image of woman who helps him understand her being, and in the unconscious of each woman an inherent image of man who helps her to understand his being. When the anima is not fully integrated, the man can express without conscious control greed, moodiness, egotism, and the inability to relate to others. But when the anima in a man is fully integrated, he can access the parts of himself which are self-nurturing, creative, empathetic, intuitive, and longing to relate to others harmoniously. When the animus in a woman is not fully integrated, a woman can express unconsciously a domineering, boastful, and emotionally uncontrollable personality. But when the animus in a woman is fully integrated, she can access the parts of herself which are rational, centered, strong, and full of divine courage. In the context of resolving dualism, the incorporation and development of our inner opposite is absolutely necessary. A man projects his anima onto typically one woman at a time, usually his partner or lover. These projections that I'm going to talk about, they're archetypes which are representative of the inner opposite and the state of that. An undeveloped anima is like Marilyn Monroe, a physically and sexually attractive female who embodies external beauty and enchantment. A much more developed anima would be Mary Poppins, a strong, independent woman who is equally kind, loving, and in touch with her femininity. The ultimate developed anima would be the Virgin Mary, the embodiment of the complete divine feminine, transcending the limitations of this world. A woman projects her animus on men in her life, but unlike the typically singular projection of the anima, this projection happens to many, if not all men, in a woman's life. An undeveloped animus is like Tarzan, a brute man who exhibits physical but not mental or spiritual endurance. A much more developed animus would be James Bond, a smart, courageous, and capable man who has both physical and mental appeal. The ultimate developed animus would be like Jesus Christ, the embodiment of the true sacred masculine, who is full in his power in all ways. So whatever state of anima and animus one projects outwardly is representing that state within. So to realize the state of your anima or animus, ask yourself a question. What do you find when you think of a desirable woman or man? Is it sexual attraction, a strong leader, someone who is nurturing, a tyrant? What is the image that is conjured? This image will tell you the state of your inner dormant inverse energies, and by default will reveal what must be developed or emphasized in order to further that image into something more transcendent.
What I'm saying is when we unlock our own inner opposite nature, then that's when completion is seen on the horizon. So the Great Mother has displayed all of this so the masculine energy could rekindle the feminine, and so she could rekindle her own masculine essence. It's one and the same. The Great Mother is not in a heavenly throne above this creation. Oh no. She has been purging along with us. This is why Lilith is actually the serpent. And we see this in artwork of Adam and Eve. This is spoken of in the Hebrew Zohar. From an esoteric perspective, the nurturing ground of chaos, which is the feminine, reflected to the masculine, its choice to be separate. This is why Sophia-Lilith is considered the mother of demons, or the mother of archons. Why? Because if the masculine ignores the gifts of the feminine, the feminine erupts. Matter itself is Sophia's shadow, and thus the collective shadow. This is why everything here casts a shadow in the light. But let me ask you, do you get rid of a shadow by willing it to disappear? And do you even need to get rid of shadows? Well, Peter Pan doesn't feel the need to get rid of shadows, and he is quite the mythological figure, allegorizing what it means to be complete. He's in Neverland, past the rainbow.
The shadow is all those uncivilized desires and emotions that are incompatible with the norms of society and with our ideal personality. It is all that we are ashamed of, that we do not wish to be. But this judgment of the shadow being undesirable, again, leads to inevitably expressing the shadow. The unconscious leaks into the conscious, and before we know it, we are experiencing the disharmony we so aimed to ignore. The shadow snowballs, gets bigger and bigger as we further repress ourselves in the name of maintaining our persona. So a crucial step in individuation is the confrontation and thus assimilation of the shadow. Again, the shadow represents the aspects which are rejected by the ego, but which are projected in other people as belonging to them. It's the darkness which we have separated from our wholeness. Looking at oneself and admitting to jealous, greedy, selfish, narcissistic tendencies, this is making the darkness conscious. It's realizing one's moral deficiencies without the filter of the persona. And through this practice, one finds that the darkness all along was just a coping mechanism, a seed of trauma planted early on in one's development. This makes the darkness actually appear cute and in desperate need of unconditional love, not repression.
So if you integrate everything you are, nothing can stop you. If you become friends with your shadow, then the monster under your bed becomes your tea time pal. Thanks for joining me. Take care.
Individuation is the process of realizing full awareness of our unique nature and our intimate connection with ourselves and thus our surroundings. In summary, the individuation process is as follows: identification and thus stripping of the persona and its inherent falsehoods, the extraction and thus transmutation of the shadow, the parts of ourselves which have remained repressed and thus projected onto external reality, the reconciliation with our inner masculine and feminine aspects and how they are projected onto others, the encounter with the archetypal wise old man and great mother, the divine teacher within that is accessed through bringing the unconscious into the conscious. This is generally not a process which can be completed in a specific time frame. The unconscious cannot be completely assimilated. It is practically infinite in its manifestations. This is why this process is always going on within one who is aiming to achieve true self-realization. Our intentions guide our path and pave the way for expansion. So one must first have the inner fire that says, I want to become whole and truly know thyself. Careful observation of one's thought forms and actions and how they correspond and manifest lead us into realizing our unconscious and thus the perils of swinging from one extreme to another. We must heal. After all, if we cannot heal ourselves, we cannot effectively create the change that many of us feel is so desperately needed in the world. I am Hermes, messenger of the gods, eternally at your service.